lost all control. Gravity is all that I know. She's over me. She's over me. She caught me with her hypnotic dance. She holds me here with only a glance. She's over me. She's over me. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bedtime Stories From Beyond. This is a Paranormal Portal production, and hope you're all ready for it. Had a really busy day today, but a lot of good things getting done. I did post a video this morning. If you haven't checked it out, please do. It's like a teaser for the podcast, and you can find it on our list. I think there's a promotions list. I better look at this to be sure that I'm giving you the correct information. Let me look quickly. If I can, let me look quickly. All right, let's see. If you go to our Paranormal Portal main page, of course, you'll see that we're live now. But if you go down to Ghosts and Spirits playlist, there's a Paranormal Portal podcast teaser. And I posted that this morning, and I think it's a good way to bring the podcast to you guys, rather than me asking you to continually go over there, check it out. Well, I brought you a piece of the podcast and put it up there as a video form, so I hope you guys will check it out if you haven't already. Kind of see all the work that we're doing, and it's kind of the reason Don and I are so excited about the podcast. Is just, it's a lot of fun. We're putting a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. We're getting a lot of great attention out of the deal, but this is just one of the elements that we've been pursuing quite a bit, is to put in a lot of production value into this listening experience, and hopefully it'll be enjoyable. So check it out if you haven't already. Again, if you like that song at the beginning of the show, it's called Feline. It's one I wrote a few years ago. If you look down in the description, I got a Bandcamp link down there where you can have a copy of it, of all of your own. So just throwing it out there, and don't forget about the Paranormal Portal Teespring store that has all the t-shirts, the pullover hoodies, stickers, mugs, phone cases, and ladies, you can get some leggings. Just saying. All right, I hope you're all ready, because it's time for bed. Julia, you kill me. It might be haunted. You never know. We don't currently believe it's haunted, but if it comes from the portal, you can never be sure if it comes with attachments. And not like, extra features, but not in the traditional sense anyway. But sorry to make that first part of the show such an infomercial, but I think that it's important to push that stuff out there so that we can continue to grow and do the things we want to do. So I don't know. It kind of feels hard for me to do, because I don't want to ever sound like I'm panhandling the show. I take a lot of pride in the show, and we've built it from the ground up, from nothing, and several of you who have reached out and been a huge help in supporting what we're doing, and even to the tune of helping us replace equipment and stuff when we had our mixing board go down. And so unfortunately, it's just a matter of the world that it does take funding to do shows. And unfortunately, as much as I'd love to be a rich, wealthy man and do this on the merit of it being something I love, everybody needs help. So do what you can if you can. If you can't, don't worry about it. Just keep spreading the word so that other people come and find us. Every little bit helps. So All right, guys, we're going to do some stories tonight. I got a really long story that I looked at last night and went, oh no, that's way too long. So I'm going to tackle it right away today. But just remember, the call-in board is always open if you're ever looking to call into the show because you've got some story of your own that you'd love to share. It's 720-923-0500. And if you don't remember that, then just look up here. Right up there. There's the number and those little digits that I still haven't blown up. Julia, so sorry. I'm trying to remember and trying to figure out when to do it. But anyway, the phone lines will be open all night, of course. So if you got something you want to share, please do. If you don't want to be on the radio, you don't want to talk publicly, that's not your thing, kind of freaks you out, then feel free to email your stories. Email to paranormalportalradio@gmail.com. And we can read your story for you. Just let us know if you want to be identified or if you'd rather not be identified, if you want to be anonymous or there's another name you want to use, whatever. Just let me know. So if you don't mention it, I'm just going to say you're a listener. But if you do say, hey, it's okay to use my name, then I will. But you definitely got to give me the real clear go ahead that you want to use your name because I don't want to put anybody out there. You know, I just really appreciate people willing to share their stories and experiences. So let's get to this big mini series of a story. And this is coming from Massachusetts. It's really long. Me, mama. Got to do all the lip exercises. La, 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 la. Okay, I think I'm ready. Let's see if I can whip this one out for you guys. God, it's huge. This might be the biggest, longest story I will have ever read on the show. I mean, it's seriously, it's probably going to take up the whole show. So if I don't see the phone line, don't get mad. But anyway, let's see what this says. Hopefully it's a good story too. I haven't even read it, so I don't know. Boston, Massachusetts, March 11th, 1960. I was 3 months old and I was dead. I had a seizure and stopped breathing. Well, I was lucky enough to have been in the hospital at the time and was almost instantly resuscitated. Long Beach, California, same day, March 11th, 1960. My 19-year-old birth father, Freddie, had skidded into an oncoming car on his motorcycle and was killed instantly. We died within a half hour of each other, and this is where it all ended and where it all began for both of us. Neither Freddie or my birth mother ever had custody of me. I was adopted at birth and raised by a family unrelated to me by blood, but still the only family I'd ever known. My first memory of any paranormal experience was in my grandparents' beach house. It all began at age 5, maybe even younger, I'm not quite sure, but I believe I was 5. The beach house had a lovely old staircase, and it was painted and polished and always really well lit, so there was no obvious reason for the terror. I felt every time that I had to climb them. I felt it every time I had to climb them. Sorry, that was really, really poorly narrated. I was never able to take those stairs in a normal or dignified manner until I was well into my teens. It seemed that by the time I got to the second step, I'd just be overwhelmed with an intense urge to run and run fast. One day I was running up that staircase so fast that I didn't see my grandmother and accidentally ran into her. She bellowed at me, "You take those stairs like the devil himself is chasing you." And at the time, it seemed like an adequate description. This staircase phenomena continued well into my 30s, but only when I was alone in the house. This same house gave me an overpowering urge to try and move things with my mind. But I was always afraid to actually try it, or put my mind to it, just in case it might work. Later on, when I'm in my early 20s, a friend from the city stayed overnight at the beach house with me, and we'd spent a Saturday morning with my young daughter watching cartoons. When it came time to get ready for the day, my friend went halfway up the living room stairs when she stopped suddenly. She looked at her pocketbook, which she had forgotten at the foot of the stairs, and she kind of smiled. Then she said, "Do you ever feel like you can move things with your mind when you're in this house?" I realized right then that I was not the only one who got the feelings from the beach house. I've heard that this old friend of mine is now a working medium/psychic. It was built by my grandfather and just as a summer cottage for many years. The beach house was always packed to its human capacity every summer night from the early 20s until the mid-60s, when it was renovated and winterized and became their private home. During the beach house glory days, my grandparents rented rooms to random circus acts who performed at a nearby amusement park. Poker games were played late into the night, laughter and music abound until the wee hours of the morning. And as far as I know, though, only my grandfather actually died in the house, and from natural causes, just of old age. In the late 80s, my 9-year-old daughter and I began living on a more permanent basis at my since deceased grandparents' beach house. I had broken my ankle a week before and had cast a cast up to my knee. Before taking a shower that evening, I'd sent my daughter downstairs to make us a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for us to snack on while watching TV in my bedroom before bed. My bedroom had once been my grandfather's room, but he had died 2 years earlier. My parents had inherited the house and completely refurbished it after Gramps had passed away, tearing out all the walls and putting in new insulation and new windows. The furniture was also brand new, so there really was no explanation for what happened next. I came out of the shower, limped into my bedroom, and was instantly surrounded by an intense odor of my grandfather. He used Aqua Velva, but it wasn't just the smell of the aftershave, it was the way he smelled wearing it. His own personal odor was permeating the room. I was instantly horrified. I couldn't breathe or move, and I was rooted to that one spot as if glued into place. Worse yet, I could hear my daughter coming up the stairs and heading right for that very room. The last thing I wanted to do was to scare my child, but I just could not, for the life of me, summon up enough strength to so much as bat an eyelash. I tried to force my frozen face into a smile as I saw her approaching, and I knew how frightened she would be if she saw that I was afraid. It didn't matter. She took one step into the room, and the plate and sandwiches went flying into the air. She screamed out loud, "Grandpapa!" She flew out of that room at the very same moment I was released from my trap and able to follow her down the stairs, hopping all the way. I actually bumped down the entire flight of stairs so fast that my rump hurt for 2 weeks afterwards. I called my big brother, who worked right down the street at a local corner store, and he came right home right away. But the smell was gone by the time he got here. I spent that night in my daughter's bedroom, and the next day I switched to another bedroom for good. Skip ahead 2 years, same beach house. I was sitting in my recliner chair, watching television, but it was about 9 p.m., stretched out on the carpet, and my feet was my ex-boyfriend, also watching television, and all of a sudden he was in some sort of distress. He was desperately trying to move his body, but it was obvious that something was holding him down. I could actually see an impression on his shirt, while hanging above him was a dark, wispy cloud. I watched all of this as if I were in a trance. I didn't think or feel anything. I didn't make a move to help him. I just sat there as he continued to struggle, watching him as he grunted and writhed, desperately fighting to move. This was a man who had recently moved my mom's refrigerator up 2 flights of stairs all by himself, and now he couldn't muster the strength to get off the floor. I have no idea how long this all lasted. It seems that just as suddenly as he was free again, we both watched the dark shadow cloud move towards the front door and disappear. When the cloud had disappeared, we turned our heads in unison and continued watching the television without saying a word, as if it had never happened. A few weeks later, while eating in a restaurant, as if on cue, we both remembered what had happened and then talked about it at great length. The fact that we both forgot about it for so long makes me wonder what other paranormal events have been erased from our memories over time. A year later, at the same house, late at night, I was in the living room alone, my daughter tucked in asleep upstairs, when several cars with lights on and music playing pulled up right outside the house. I listened and cussed as I realized that a bunch of my buddies must be stopping by for a little late-night party at my house, and I wasn't going to be happy about it if they woke up my daughter. As I was getting up and going to the front door, I heard all the car doors closing, maybe 4 or 5 cars, and I could tell they were all drunk by their laughter, and the songs that they were singing Why else would my friends, the Led Zeppelin kids in the late 70s, be singing, "How much is that doggy in the window?" They moved across the porch and then opened up the outside screen door just as I threw open the inside door to reveal, you guessed it, nothing and nobody there. Just a shock of cold air on a hot summer night. This happened to me 3 or 4 times after the original incident, but I was always alone, and years later my daughter told me that she had heard people out on the porch partying, and when she looked out, of course, there was nobody there. She had also heard crying from the upstairs bathroom on many occasions, and when she had been small, and she said she just knew that it was my grandmother crying. My daughter was only 3, and when Nana died, and in no way could have remembered her. I had 2 major experiences when I was 17. One of these experiences was my one and only full-bodied apparition sighting ever. My first experience that year was shortly after my friend's boyfriend died. He had been the only one involved in a drunk driving accident. Only a few days later, and my friend, still hugely distraught, sat at my kitchen table and cried out for her dead boyfriend to hear her. She then proceeded to tell him how much she loved him and she would miss him and that she forgave him. I nearly fainted dead away as soon as she had finished speaking. I had never felt so cold or lost and out of control in all my life, and suddenly 6 stacked dishes flew off the shelf behind us, and just like that, I instantly felt better. Later that year, I was home on a Saturday night with my little baby. A few of my girlfriends had gone out for the night and were partying at a pub in a nearby town. Shortly after last call at the bar, when I was nearly asleep, at home, one of my friends called and said her car wouldn't start, and would I come and get them all in my car, please? Believe me, I wasn't feeling it, but of course, I got dressed, left my baby with my mom, and went to pick up my girls. When I got to the bar, it was closed, and my 3 semi-drunken friends were in the parking lot, surrounded by and partying with about 20, maybe more, biker dudes. I really wasn't very happy about this. I was tired and I wanted to get back home to my baby. But I got out of my car and went toward the large group, all the while yelling at my friends to get in the car now. And as I got nearer to the group, I heard a noise to my right and turned to see a state trooper standing about 5 feet away from me. He had on a different kind of state cop uniform than I'd ever seen before, but all I really needed to know was that he was a cop. In the back of my mind, I guess I figured that they must have gotten new uniforms, but I didn't have to turn my head very far from the trooper to look at my friends, so I still had him in my peripheral. I remember saying something to my friends like, "Great, now look what you've done. The cops are here." And as I was saying this, the cop started to move from my sight, so I turned my head toward him, and just as I did, poof, he was gone. Just like that, I learned later that the uniform was actually a 1950s style uniform, and as I look back, I remember thinking at the time that he was wearing knee-high black boots. But now, whenever I think of that moment, I'm not so sure that there was anything at all below the knees. I never told anyone about this for a very long time, and the people who were present were too loud and never heard me tell them the cops were there. Years later, while in my 20s, I married and moved away from the beach house. My husband is a no-nonsense, reality-based sort of bloke who wasn't and still isn't into the paranormal thing. He tells me that he will spend enough time convening with the dead when he joins them, and I can't dispute his logic there. And I couldn't deny my instincts either, but this being a solid marriage that has stood the test of time, we managed to work out all the differences. During the early days of our marriage, though, the paranormal rarely ever came up, and I never shared with him the experiences that I had, although I did have a few worth mentioning. 2 of which happened while I was sleeping. So even though my heart and mind tell me that these things were real and that I was actually awake at the time, I could never prove it to anyone else. And as evidence, these incidents would have to be rejected. But I know differently. In May of 1994, I'd finally decided to look up my birth father, Freddie. Look up my birth father, Freddie. That's a lot of F's. I guess it's just two, but it was hard to enunciate. I had met my birth mother at the age of 24, and she had given me some info on Freddie, but not really very much. I found myself as a product of a one-night fling with not much info to go on. Now that my daughter was getting older, I decided to look into him. Of course, I knew by then that he had died tragically at a very young age. First, I went to Freddie's old high school, where I had gotten some black and white photos of him, and I even located a cousin who had lived with Freddie's family as a child. So I was well into getting to know, to a limited extent, of course, the man who helped to make me. During this time, I had what you might call a dream, but what I call a stunning and wonderful reality. I don't remember what day it was, but it was early summer around 3 a.m. or so. I was awakened by a bright light emanating from the middle of my oversized bedroom, which was once a 3-bedroom upstairs, was now just one huge room. As the light began to fade, an image began to emerge and then became more clear, and I could see that it was a young man in jeans and black leather jacket with a shock of red hair that he kept slicked back. His eyes were blue, the blue of the ocean, and his smile was shy and wide. I didn't hesitate, not even for a moment, when he beckoned for me to come closer. Yes, I knew right away that this young man was Freddie. I was lying on my bed looking right up at him, and he was as real as you or me and just standing there waiting for me to cross the room. I was 34 years old. I had no fear as I gleefully hopped up and out of bed to go to him, and when I hit the floor, I felt younger, more alive. I felt like I had when I was in my 20s. As I continued to walk toward him, I became aware that suddenly I was a teenager again, and then a young child about 8 years old. As I reached him, I realized that I was now only a very young child of maybe 3 or maybe 4. I stood before him and reached my arms up to him, and I was now only about as tall as his waist, and he bent down and lovingly gathered me up in his arms, and then he began to turn slowly, and as he turned, I felt myself getting smaller in his arms, and I became younger, smaller, a toddler perhaps. And when he completed the turn, though I was a newborn, an infant again. Freddie cuddled me in his arms as we gazed lovingly at each other, blue eyes to blue eyes, soaking up the love that we had never known. And yes, I knew that I was now an infant. I was aware of it all, everything as it was happening, not a dream, but so far out of reality. It seemed like we stayed like that for hours, locked in each other's eyes. At the same time, I know it could only have been moments, and then slowly he began to turn again in the opposite direction, and as he did, I began to get bigger and older again. I felt so sad. I became frightened. I didn't want to leave him. But he held me closely, and I just knew everything would be all right. And when he let me down from his arms, I was just 4 years old again, and then had to give me a gentle push to make me walk backwards towards my bed. I just didn't want to lose him again. But I went, and as I was walking, I began to age. I was 13, then 15, 20, then 25. I got back onto bed and pulled the blankets over my head once again, and I was 34 years old, and I was crying. I woke up crying. Could I really have had such an imaginative dream, or did Freddie really return to me, fueled by my sudden interest in him? Was this his way of telling me that he had been with me my entire life? I wish I knew. I did know one thing. If it was a dream, it has never faded as dreams do. I hold dearly every moment of the entire experience, as if it just happened yesterday. The very next day, I went to visit Freddie's grave for the first time, a huge old cemetery about 10 miles from my home. I had never been there before, but I went right to Freddie's grave, right to it, with no help at all. I'd never done anything like that before, but I do believe that given the right situation, I could maybe do it again. April 22nd, 1996, around 1 a.m., I was so sick with allergies and bronchitis that I had been asleep for about 13 hours, and suddenly I sat straight up as I felt the air, wind, presence, I don't know what, come rushing at me. and I felt my mom in a rush of I felt my mom in a rush of the moment. She was in front of me, and I was with her, and then she was in me, and I became her. Feeling, thinking, smelling, knowing all that was my mother, and then she was gone. I laid back down just as my husband asked, "What is it? What was that?" And I calmly replied, "My mother just died." And I rolled over and went back to sleep. Of course it's true, she really did die at that moment, but why hadn't I woke up and ran downstairs and called someone? Why did I just roll over without doing anything? And what about my husband? Why wasn't he startled awake by my frightening words? We simply went back to sleep. Maybe my mind was rejecting what it had just been through, or maybe it had been exhausted by the experiences, and it was just so real. My mother went right through me, and although I can never prove it, I know that it really happened. A special moment between body and soul that will never be forgotten. I was left knowing that I wasn't saying goodbye. I was just saying so long and see you soon. I was left with the absolute knowledge of her love for me from the inside out. The next 10 years leading up to our moving into the haunted house in Salem were pretty uneventful. I did receive 3 phone calls from people who had recently passed. Wow. I know that sounds nuts, but it really happened. The first call was in 96, excuse me, shortly after my mom died. I got home from work and there was a call from an old friend on my caller ID from 5 a.m. that morning. I couldn't imagine why he had called after so many years of not talking or even seeing each other. But soon the phone rang again and my ID read that it was his phone again. I picked it up and said hello a few times, but I got no response. I forgot all about it until a few days later when I learned that he had passed. He had died the night before he called me. He died in his home around 11 p.m. and was discovered the next night at 6 p.m. Calculations say he was alone, unfounded, and dead in his bed from a drug overdose when he called me. 1 year later, a similar story, another dear departed old friend calling me from his home, according to my caller ID, moments after he died in the hospital from a post-surgical complication. In 2013, my own dear brother passed in his sleep at the age of 54. His heart simply gave out. It was so unexpected that we were all just in a fog, emotionally crushed, hurting and totally out of sorts. My brother had worked at the same corner store restaurant for several years, and within hours after his death, my brother's boss started calling me. My caller ID gave the phone and the name of the restaurant, and it read simply Smitty's Corner Payphone with the phone number. And he continued to call me over and over for the next 2 days, but I just couldn't answer. I was buried in my grief and didn't want to talk to anyone except my family. It was almost a week later when my daughter and I went to Smitty's Corner for a memorial to celebrate my brother's life, and I had just glanced at my brother's boss when it suddenly struck me there was no reason for him to be calling me from an outside payphone. He would have called me from inside the store, or his cell phone or a home phone, but not the payphone. And why would he call so many times over and over and over when he knew we were grieving? I just knew at that very moment that it had been my brother, and sure enough, when I got home, the caller ID said Smitty's Corner again. It was the last time he ever called, and to this day, I regret not taking any of those calls. I chalk up those calls as a precursor to my ability to catch EVP so easily now. I'm a medium, a sensitive, or a psychic. I have no idea, and I'm not sure if I'm willing to find out quite yet. My husband and I moved into Salem from the South Shore of Massachusetts in October of '05, and the reason we moved up country was to make an easier commute for my husband. We soon found a lovely little cottage right across the street from a small lake. We fell in love and agreed to buy the little house the first time we saw it. Right off, I loved our little home by the lake. It had been recently renovated, so everything was new and gleaming. Before I moved in, I spent several days there with my husband getting up shelves and pictures and curtains. I never sensed or felt anything that seemed strange to me during those days shortly before moving in. When moving day came, my now adult daughter was a big help. This is her first time seeing the place, and I couldn't wait for her to see how close it was to the lake. She always loved to swim and sunbathe, so I just knew she was going to love this place. Well, she didn't. She hated it. And I saw it in her eyes the minute she got inside. She kept trying to tell me, "It's nice, Ma. You're going to like it here." But her eyes did not agree with what her lips were saying. Later, my husband told me that she had complained that the house had a terrible odor all through it. She couldn't understand why nobody else could smell it. A year later, she admitted to me that the first time in the house made her feel like she needed to run out of there, go home, and wash the creepy off. I wish she had told me how she had felt, but I understand why she didn't. I'd never lived so far apart before, about an hour and a half, and we missed each other like crazy. Okay, so we did talk on the phone 1 to 4 times a day, but it was not the same as actually being together. My daughter was in my heart, and we are very close, and we love each other dearly. When she would visit us, she would normally stay a few days or more if her work schedule permitted. So she did stay overnight on and off over the next year, even though we didn't seem to be getting along so very well at that time. I would gleefully wait for her to return to the little cottage, but unfortunately, whenever she did come back, she would be a monster. From the moment she stepped into that house until the end of her stay, when I was rushing her out the door. She was very bad-tempered and constantly trying to pick fights. She would then go home and call me and thank me, telling me she had a great time and how grateful she was for my cooking and my love, and that she was sorry for being in such a bad mood. She would sound again like the sweetheart she really is. I blamed her moody behavior on my moving away, and all was forgiven and forgotten. The very day I moved into the cottage, I started to smell a terrible odor. For the life of me, I could never understand why I hadn't smelled it before moving in. The stench seemed to come out of everywhere, the walls, the floors, the ceilings. It was intensely strong and nasty, but would only last for a few minutes, making it impossible to find the exact source of it. Yet we would smell it often, and it wasn't a case of getting used to a bad odor after being in the house for a while. No, this stench would come suddenly, from out of nowhere, even after I had been in the house for hours. Yet I never thought that any of this could be paranormal, not once. I'd gotten crusty and set in my own ways now, having reached my mid-40s. I didn't remember my earlier paranormal experiences. I'm a night owl. I sat on my chair by the window in the living room facing my TV. Shortly after moving into that spot, I started hearing a sound that I knew I recognized. It was the sound of a horse, pawing and snorting outside my little cottage window. I'd quickly shut off the light and peer into the darkness, but the horse would be gone. I thought that it must be a neighbor's horse that got loose, but then I'd soon forget about it. Until one night when it happened again, and I got up and ran to the pitch blackness of my front yard, and I really like horses, and I was determined to meet this horse. When I got out in the middle of the yard, I suddenly became filled with a mind-numbing fear as the deep blackness surrounded me. I spun into fight or flight mode, and I chose the latter. But instead of being able to run away, I got the dreaded lead legs. I felt like I was walking through waist-high water with heavy chains wrapped around me that kept pulling me back. The door to the cottage was open, and I could see the light in the living room shining in it. It looked to be about a mile away, but I knew it was only a few steps. Yikes. But I finally find my way to the door, and somehow my right mind made me blow off this experience as well. I told myself that I had probably been asleep at the time and that it had never happened. A dream, a nightmare, anything but reality. Many times while inside the house, I had called out to my husband, and he would answer me in muffled tones. The house was very small, so we should have been able to hear each other easily. I'd go looking for him and see him outside busy working in the yard, all as if he had been there for hours. Never once did I question or even guess that it was paranormal. My husband is the type of guy who likes to work all the time, and he was tearing up and putting things back together in the cottage the whole time we were there. Hammers, saws, drills, whenever he was home, there were tool noises going on. He replaced the heating system and added 2 more heating zones to the house, and we built an additional room onto the front porch. And it wasn't just a small amount of work that he was doing. It was actually pretty heavy duty for such a small space. And I've heard that even mild amount of construction can bring about spirits, and if that is true, that would explain how I ended up with a house full of them. Then there were the smells, strong tobacco smells that would come and go in a non-smoking home, whole meals cooking at 3 a.m., and a strong scent of soap, which I recognized as ivory soap. No, not just a scent, but a nose-tingling, tear-inducing odor of ivory soap. It would only last a few moments, but it was so close to me and so thick that it would literally turn my stomach. A large barn-shaped shed sat on the property. Stored in it were over 6,000 record albums and 45s. My husband had inherited my late brother's record collection, and there were so many records that my husband had to build several shelves in the shed to store them on. Often I would be in the yard and I would hear music coming from the shed, and I never questioned it, as I just assumed that my husband had forgotten to turn off his radio, but many times I would hear tools working in the shed when my husband wasn't home and the shed should be empty. But when I got up close to it, I could no longer hear them, though the noise must be coming from another home or ricocheting somehow off our shed. And then there was a great wind that would blow from my refrigerator door. Now, as I look back, I cannot explain how or why. I just accepted this phenomena. There were no windows, no doors, no drafts anywhere near the refrigerator, yet many times a fierce gust of wind would seemingly blow from the refrigerator door with enough force to swing my ponytail back and forth. Somehow I just accepted it as if it were a normal, everyday occurrence. When it did finally dawn on me that it was paranormal, I tried to debunk it, but there were no clear answers. October 25th, 2006. My daughter stayed over in a small spare room downstairs that I used as a dressing room, and she was on an air mattress and looked quite comfortable. And we just finished watching all of her favorite scary shows, and it was 4 a.m. I went off to the upstairs bedroom where I got into my bed, and just as hubby was getting out of it and ready for work. An hour later, I was deep into a really decent sleep when I felt someone get into bed with me. I knew right off who it was, so I asked my 30-year-old daughter, "Aren't you a little old to be getting in Mommy's bed?" She tells me that there is something staring at her in that room and she cannot and will not sleep in there. I say, "Oh my God, it's just the cats looking at you, and you've been watching really scary movies at night," but I was too tired to resist and instead just went back to sleep. The next day, my daughter decided to split a day early, vowing she wouldn't spend another night in that room. Now, I knew I had to do something soon. I wanted my child to feel safe in my house. I decided to do something that I'd seen on one of her what I called ghostly shows, and it was Tap's Ghost Hunter show, where I had learned about recording with an audio recorder to hear spirit voices called EVP. This was the answer on how I was going to prove to my daughter, believer of ghosts, that there really was no such thing as the boogeyman and that my house was not haunted. I don't know why I didn't remember the paranormal events that I had experienced while I was younger, but I now saw myself as a staunch, reality-based, level-headed, a darn Capricorn, for goodness sakes. I just didn't believe in the paranormal anymore, and I had no idea what had happened to change that. Anyway, the next day I forgot all about putting a recorder in the spare room. I probably would have forgotten about it altogether, but then I heard a voice. I was in my living room and my husband was on the front porch sawing, really loudly, some plywood for one of his shelves. Once he started up the saw, I heard as clearly as day a female voice right beside me complain, "Oh no, not again." Well, I couldn't ignore this at first, and I started to believe that it had really happened. This lasted for about an hour before I talked myself out of it again, and I decided it was my next-door neighbor's voice that I had heard. Wow. She really tries to hang on to that paradigm. Even though it was cold out and all my windows were closed and the voice had come from right beside me. But I did put a recorder in the dressing room. I shut the door. I used the digital audio recorder, a Sony BICD B300. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds good. And I set it to voice activated. And this was the evening on October 27th. I left it on overnight, shutting it off in the early morning. There's about 50 minutes, 50 minutes on the recording, and much of it was just cars rolling down the busy route in front of the house. I didn't know how interesting this recording would become until later on that night. Sorry, I just looked at the chat. The night of October 28th, 06, I got roped into going to the lumber yard with hubby, and I was on the way to the grocery store, and as usual, I'd wait in the truck. Most times I bought a newspaper or catalog along with me, but this time I grabbed the recorder and earphones to listen to the recorder while waiting. I knew that I could prove once and for all to my daughter that the room was not haunted, and I could do so by using a method I saw in her own favorite program. And then I heard the laughter. I listened to the tape, and clearly there was a child laughing and a man speaking right into the recorder's microphone. It was impossible, but it was true. I stuffed the recorder in my bag and did my shopping like I was in a sort of dream state. I just couldn't wait to get somewhere quiet and listen to that tape. The first EVP I heard was a man saying, "Let me out," and then a child's laughter. So clear and close to the microphone that these people could only have been in that very room. I listened to the end of the recording and heard nothing else, but then I started it from the beginning. The first EVP on the recording is of a man saying, "F you, mother." Okay, sorry. And then a sharp intake of breath. It is loud and clear and could only have come from someone speaking directly into the microphone. The next EVP was a man saying, "I'm coming, I love you." And he breathed heavily, and there are loud banging noises in these recordings that I hadn't heard during the recording, only after the playback. I knew this was impossible, and yet there was the very evidence in my hand. I sat on the whole thing for about 24 hours, and then I started to try and debunk everything. I began by leaving the recorder in the same spot as I had gotten the original recordings. I went into the room, into the house, and spoke in a natural level tone, as the voices on the recorder had, and then I went and stood outside the room near my neighbor's yard and spoke in a natural voice, and then I called to my husband in a loud voice, and then a good loud yell, even though he wasn't home at the time. At this point, I still didn't want the neighbors to think I was crazy. That soon changed when I began to go out in the middle of the night to take pictures on my shed. By then, I no longer cared who thought what about my mental state. I needed to see if the yelling had penetrated the outside wall. It didn't. So one at a time, I turned on every radio and TV in the house while leaving the recorder in the same spot. None of the voices emanating from these sources sounded anything like the voices I had heard in the earlier recordings. I took a walk around the neighborhoods, searched for an extra large antenna on top of cars and homes, but came up with nothing. Later, I drove around and looked for antenna within a few miles of my house, and again, nothing. I rustled paper in thick paper bags, turned doorknobs and faucets. I noted all the creaks and groans while walking around the home, and nothing. I learned a tip here. You can step on a board in one room, and it can groan in another room. I recorded the water running, toilet flushing, microwave going, everything that I thought might be causing the voices, but nothing even came close. Naturally, the only thing left to do was to try it again, so here's what I did. I waited until I knew my husband and I were going to be going out. I was so new to the EVP that I still thought for some reason the voices would only come on the recorder if it was left alone. I made a big point of going around the house and shutting down everything. And then I went around unplugged everything. I turned on the recorder at this time and sat down to write out my grocery list in complete silence. I got up, put my coat on, and had to search for a few minutes for my keys, and then I put my boots and I left, leaving the recorder running. During my last moments in the house, I made no noise except for my flip-flops flopping as I walked around looking for my keys. But the recorder tells a different story. There are 3 voices. A woman talking, then yelling, a child screaming, then talking, and a man whispering throughout deeper in the background. This EVP is 41 seconds long. I had no idea at the time that an EVP this clear and this long is highly unusual. After all, everything about this whole thing was still pretty strange to me. When I first heard this EVP for just a few moments, I thought I must be going to die. There are people talking in my home from all around me, but I could only hear them on the recorder. What else could it be but some sort of sign of my approaching death, or some equally impending doom? Of course, I know these ideas were crazy. It was obviously aliens, a parallel universe, or the FBI secretly taping us, hubby's idea. Maybe it was our own brain waves projecting our voices out loud, were the cats talking to us psychically, the neighbors or previous owners playing a joke. But then it hit me. It wasn't any of those things. It really was the voices of the dead. What happens in a eureka moment like this? Well, you want to tell everybody about it, and as fast as possible. There is life after death. I really thought that everyone was just going to believe me. I called people, went online and sent emails. It was Tuesday, October 31st. My own sister laughed at me and said, "Happy Halloween," before hanging up. Only my daughter was willing to believe me and oohed and awed over the EVP. And in spite of the fact that it was Halloween and that I often told her scary stories about this time, she did, however, get to mention, "I told you so." I listened to that one crazy long EVP over and over again, trying to understand the words it contained. The woman sounds like she is speaking Japanese. A child screams, and all the while a man is whispering menacingly in the background. So damn scary, yet somehow so compelling to me. At this point, I only had 4 EVP, while today I have over 500 collected since that night in October 06. Unfortunately, when we lived there another year, half because it turned out that the dirt basement was very bad for my health, and we had to let the home go. And during our stay in the little cottage, my husband and I had several more paranormal experiences, and it did contact a paranormal team who confirmed that the home was haunted. They did this by collecting their own video and EVP evidence. It was wonderful to have a haunting confirmed, but at the end of the day, I was still pretty much taking the haunting on as my own, becoming more and more obsessed on a deeper and more personal level. I saw a bottle spin on its own all by itself. I watched in stunned silence and then got dizzy myself and had to go throw up. It was as if I had been spun myself. And my husband, once a non-believer, now not able to dispute the evidence, continually felt something getting up on the bed with him. All the while he kept dreaming about a golden retriever named Ruffle. One night, while sleeping, my husband began to scream out loud, "I don't want a dog." He was kicking and screaming and moaning, and I couldn't wake him. And finally he settled down and I went back to sleep. When I mentioned to him the next day, he remembered dreaming about Ruffles again, but thought it had been a good dream and not the nightmare that I described. These dog dreams continued from my poor husband throughout our stay in the cottage. Thankfully, though, he has never complained about them since leaving. I remember one time, long before I realized that I was living in a haunted house, I told my doctor that I was getting an extremely cold feeling on my left shin that would come and go, and he said he had no idea what it could be other than a draft. Righto. It was a draft that had the ability to follow me from room to room and hit me in the same exact spot every time. The cold spot on my leg was constant until we moved in late 2007 and has never returned since. Maybe that's Ruffles. I don't know if there was ever a pet there for sure, but I had to guess. If I had to guess, I would have to say yes. And there was one, a golden retriever named Ruffles. By November of 2006, I was in a frenzy, recording day and night, not only in the house but outside, where I would go in between. I recorded in the car, at the store, in restaurants, and other people's homes. One night I was terribly sick with asthma, byproduct of living in the cottage, and had to go to the hospital, and I begged my husband to go and get me the recorder before we left. I'll never forget the pitiful way he looked at me when he flatly refused. I hadn't even gotten into taking pictures yet, and that would come later and would open up another whole universe for me to explore. My shed. By the end of November in '06, I had already had more than 30 Class A EVPs in only a month. It would be another month before the TAPS family team would go to the house. 2 months since that first recording. And 2 very eventful months they were. I'd gotten some of the very best recordings in November and December of '06. And I had learned by research who 2 of them were. 2 of these friends were. Henry and Evelyn, husband and wife. Henry had been the last person who had owned the home, who had lived in it. It had been sold, renovated, and resold in a turnover to my husband and I. Henry had lived a long life and died in 2004, and his wife Evelyn had also lived in the house and had died in 1984. I have a cute recording of both of them where I say to Henry, "Do you want us to leave, Henry? Are we taking your space?" And Henry answers, "I'm fine," which is ended with a polite cough, suggesting that Henry's wife Evelyn was not so happy with us being there. Henry seemed to really like my husband and began to speak most often whenever he was around. I found out later that they did have much in common as far as liking to work on the outside and smoking cigarettes, right down to their similar slim and tall build. I learned from a neighbor how Henry actually looked, and one of my favorite recordings of Henry and hubby is when my husband had to come in for a moment to warm up from working outside, and as he was leaving again, he asked me, "Did I come in here with a package of butts?" Probably not. You can clear Henry answer, "I don't think so." Once, after having made hubby a cup of coffee, I asked him if he wanted some more sugar. He answers, "Yes." And then I ask how many sugars, and he says, "Oh, a couple. And I need a stirrer, too." The spirit of who I now believe is Henry answers, "Are you sure about that?" I felt no fear about these 2, Henry and Evelyn, and I was always happy whenever I heard one of their voices on my recorder playback. But there is a child in my recordings as well, and she once said her name was Sam on one of my early recordings. But it is a D recording and won't transfer well. I don't know what that means. I could never locate any info on this child in any of the public records as I had of Henry and Evelyn. Sam seemed to spend most of her time in my dressing room, and for whatever reason, I was often frightened by her. Really frightened. She didn't have the same calming effect on me as the other 2, and I swear that one evening she made me play music on my computer that I didn't want to hear. It was old and creepy lullaby music that was part of a spam that I had accidentally opened and was about to delete, and instead I was stricken with the urge to play it over and over again, rooted to my chair and sick to my stomach until I finally was able to stop. I must have replayed it 20 times. But once I was able to stop obsessively clicking my mouse, I calmed down again, right away again, almost as if I was being soothed, and I then quickly grabbed my recorder and turned it on, and as I was getting the heck out of there and going to bed, I shut off my computer and my AOL, which, as AOL users know, says goodbye. The next day I discovered the recording contained a voice clearly answering AOL's goodbye with a hearty bye of their own. I believe it was Evelyn that night who stepped in and stopped me from playing that creepy song maniacally over and over. And I believe that she still is with me and saw me to bed that night to keep me safe from Sam. I knew that Sam was manifesting as a child, but I never believed that she died as a child, and I think she just chooses to come back as one, perhaps to her happier days, when she vacationed as a child by the lake, and even though she didn't always act like an innocent child, I firmly believe that the spirit of Sam is very real and exceptionally strong, and even somehow able to compel me to do her bidding on 2 separate occasions. Sam had practically stolen my dressing room by this time. I would most often have to leave the door closed and stay away from it when I was alone in the house, and at night, in one early morning, however, around 3 a.m., I was simply overcome with the urge to go in there, and I was actually talking myself into going into a room at 3 a.m. that I was afraid to go in near at 3 p.m. I was trembling and I was so afraid to go in, but I knew that I had to do it. I went in to take pictures of Sam at her request, or rather at otherworldly insistence, and I closed the door closed my eyes and shut the light out, clicked the pick, and then turned on the lights before opening my eyes. Scared wasn't the word for it. I could only manage to do this twice before I had to flee. The results were pretty obvious to me. Sam was a solid white blob with little orbs flowing off of her. Both pictures were refutable and could never be used as real evidence, but I knew she was there. I could smell the strong odor of ivory soap as she came ever close to me, and I tried to will myself to say I just couldn't do it. Not alone anyway. Or to stay, rather. She couldn't stay. I regret chickening out in that room that night, and I wish I could have stayed to get a better evidence of what was going on in there, but the room was just too horrifying for me to withstand. One night while my husband and I were watching television, I glanced over and caught a jellyfish-like figure with the shape and head of a child peeking around the corner at us. I looked at the figure and then glanced at my husband, who was also looking in the same direction. I knew for sure he saw the same thing that I was looking at, but he refuses to admit it to this day. One other time in broad daylight, my husband and I were in the living room talking about the work that he was doing outside on his car when he wondered out loud, "Do you think it's going to rain today?" And in true Henry fashion, and in Henry's own voice, a voice that I heard on my recordings before saying the exact same words, the answer came from the other side of the room right out loud, and strong it answered, "Oh, I don't think so." This is the only time that I ever heard Henry's voice when it wasn't in a recording. I gulped and looked right at my husband, who was staring right at the spot where the voice came from. I jumped up and pointed at him. "There," I said, "I know you heard it because I saw you look." "Nope," he said quietly, "heard nothing," as he backed out of the room and went back to his chores. Once while cooking dinner, I felt this overwhelming urge to take pictures. I just dead stopped and grabbed my camera. I took some pretty wild red and orange pictures that night with my brand new camera. I never got any other pictures in those colors after that one instance. Did Henry whisper in my ear that day in a voice I couldn't really hear but subconsciously did? Did he really pose and let me take pictures of him that night? Was the burst of color all he could muster up? Was that you, Henry? Wow, this is really long. I don't think I'm even near the ending, but we're going to keep going because I'm going to get through it. Finally, it was December 9th, rather, of 2006, the day before the Taps family team was about to arrive. I'd left on my recorder in our bedroom that night and had woken up to one of my creepiest EVPs ever. In it, a man with a mechanical voice says, "My eyes are wide open." And a woman plainly asks, "Are you scared?" Why this EVP scares me so much, I really don't know. It's not so much different than any of the others, but ever since I heard that first recording, I have never put a recorder in that room where we were sleeping again. Sorry if I startled you. I couldn't resist. Still, I hadn't yet put an end to my strange habit of going out late at night, taking pictures of my shed. Yes, I said my shed. There was something going on in that shed and night. Day and night, rather. In almost all my 200-plus shed pictures, the roof is always either foggy, cloudy, smoky, or covered in orbs. Thanks, Julia. I soon began to call the roof of the shed the hellmouth, and to this day I believe it had to be some sort of vortex or of constant energy transference. The thing seemed to have a life of its own, and yes, I said the shed. As in that nutty lady was out taking pictures of her shed again at 3 a.m. this morning. That shed. Once, while I was packing just a few weeks before leaving the cottage, I was suddenly and completely engulfed in a freezing cold, and I immediately said, "Knock that off, you're scaring me." And it stopped all at once. While I may have felt like I was getting used to these things happening around me, deep inside I was still somewhat frightened. Late one night, shortly before heading to my bed, I was suddenly overcome with the feeling of loss and sorrow, and I thought that I recognized this feeling as artificial, a feeling that was induced by whoever or whatever was haunting the home at that moment. But I turned on my recorder and set it on my shoulder, and I asked, "Are you Freddy?" and clear as the day, from right beside me, his voice whispers softly, "Yes, I am." I know that spirits speak in many different voices. I know that this ghostly recording could be just about anybody, but it wasn't anybody. And it was truly my dear father Freddie, and I cried for a long time after I heard the recording. Even though I'm not prone to crying, and even now, hundreds of EVPs later, this one remains my very favorite. Today I live in a new home. It's decidedly not haunted, and I stopped recording every moment of every day, and I am relieved that I am no longer compelled to do so. Oh, I still record when the mood strikes, because when the mood strikes, it is never wrong, and I always pick up something from the other side. It is as if someone were whispering in my ear and telling me to go ahead, start the recorder. Now I'm a faithful servant of our dearly departed, and I will continue to start the recorder until I am nothing more than an EVP myself. Okay, so there are some pictures attached to this, and in the spirit, oh my God, in the spirit of, they're very tiny pictures, in the spirit of sharing the visual evidence that she claims to have gotten, I will put them on screen for you. All right, so this is the first one. It's obviously quite small. I'm not sure what we're looking at here, but this is the first one. Okay. Very cool light stuff going on. Next one. Oh, wow. That's pretty intense. Not sure what we're looking at here, but looks like there's a wall back here, a picture on the wall back here. Some couch or something in just in the little bit of foreground here. But this wispiness is definitely pretty odd and unusual. This one, wow, look at that. I don't even know how you would fake that. It's like a really harsh overexposure, but it doesn't seem to be just a cloud. Huh. Oh, look at that. That must be the shed. And there's the foggy stuff going on above it. That's pretty intense. And then, what's next? Oh, what in the hell? I don't know if we'll be able to see this one or not, but there seems to be an orb up here, but I don't know for sure. This one's bigger. A big hot spot here. That could be something really close to the camera, like a piece of fabric, because I'm seeing these little hairs coming off. If it's sitting right by the flash, it's possible, but I'll assume this woman kind of knows what she's doing. There is a pretty unique shadow here, so that's what makes me think maybe this isn't as otherworldly, because it's actually stopping the light. So this one kind of does seem like some kind of an obstruction right in front of the lens, because there is a shadow cast behind it from where the flash is blocked. So I don't know about that one. Again and again with the shadow. So if this were really a light anomaly, it would be projecting light, and there wouldn't be a shadow behind here. So I'm not so convinced with these that these are anything otherworldly. I just think something got in the way of the flash, enough to appear in the frame, but also enough to block the flash before it hit the clothing on the rack behind. So I don't know. Those to me are not quite as solid, but a few of those are really cool. And some of them are really tiny. So very cool. I don't know. I don't pretend to know for sure, but that was a hell of a story. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. I'm here all night, as you know. So anyway, I guess that's an hour story. Well, actually, a little more than an hour. I hope you guys liked it. It was really good, really well told story. I don't know. This lady's had a pretty active life. Again, I think those last two were just blocks, something blocking that flash, because there wouldn't be a shadow. If it's an anomaly that projects light, it's going to project light, not block light. So I don't know what it is for sure, but very interesting. I mean, the stories, the narratives are really powerful. So take of it what you will, ladies and gentlemen, but that was the longest story I've ever read on the show, bar none. I mean, I've never read read a longer one before, but I hope you guys enjoyed it all the same. I enjoyed reading it. We're still on. What do you mean still on? Are you talking to me, Yemcat? We are still on currently, but I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly always love doing it. So, you're done for the day. We're done for the day too, brother. We are just about to close up the shop. Remember, tomorrow's Wednesday, so Don will be here with me, and we'll continue our journey into the paranormal portal for our 2-hour show on Wednesday. So I hope you guys will join us then, and have a wonderful night. And thank you all for being here. You know what? I'm not even sure how many are here or have been here. Oh, we got up there. We got into the 50s. We're still in the about 50 now. So thanks, guys, for being here, being a part of the shows. Remember, check out the podcast, that short teaser I put up on the YouTube page to let you know what the podcast is kind of about. At least one segment of it, which is, you know, when I'm reading ghost stories on the bedtime stories, I can't do all the production things that I do on the podcast. So it's a lot of fun, and I hope it at least breathes some life into those stories. So you guys have a great night. Love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other. Help each other out. Find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. All right, guys, have a wonderful night. And again, we'll see you tomorrow night for our 2-hour Wednesday extravaganza. It's our Hump Day's Eve episode. So we'll talk to you then. Sweet dreams, everybody.